The Post figured it out. It was not like Howard to let something like this linger as a mystery.
When it is the time for Deep Throat to be made public, will Bernstein and Woodward write the story?
Maybe we should.
Yeah,
a special byline back to the Washington Post?
I suspect that probably is the way to do it.
Will you come here first and let us know? And they laugh. We have to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more with Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward.
Would President Nixon have resigned, Bob, had it not been for you and Carl?
No, that gets into what is called if history. Suppose we had not written those stories. We've thought about it and we've realized that it's futile because you can't answer it. If X happened and it caused Y, would something else have caused Y? Very often it would have.
Are you too uncomfortable by this time with your new celebrity status?
Well, I just don't
think of ourselves that way.
Our guests today on Meet the Press are reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. Their stories on Watergate won a Pulitzer Prize for the Washington Post and were a factor in the eventual resignation of President Nixon. Their book, All the President's Men, has just been made into a movie, and their new book about the final days of the Nixon administration is a subject of some controversy.
We make no pretext toward infallibility on this, that this is reporting. This is what we call the best obtainable version of the truth. A year and a half after the events that we describe in the book. There may be something wrong in it. Nobody has successfully or effectively challenged a single line of the book. We're reporters, and we often, as we described in our first book, we make mistakes. Maybe we did in this one.
Carl Bernstein, did you make any mistakes?
The Haldeman one that we talked about.
Other than that?
Really, we made very few mistakes, and almost everything we wrote, both in the paper, in All the President's Men, and in the final days, has been confirmed. And in fact, what you see from the tapes that have surfaced since President Nixon's death,
the famous scene of President Nixon and Henry Kissinger praying together, confirmed by both
Nixon and right. But we really underestimated how draconian what happened in this White House was, how criminal what happened in this White House was, how abusive of the American system this administration was.
But you know, that time we were on Meet the Press, the final days had come out, and it had that scene of Nixon and Kissinger praying on the eve of Nixon's resignation. We very carefully reported that. And
people wouldn't believe it.
And people wouldn't believe it, and Kissinger and the White House the Ford White House then kind of denied it and so forth. And then you read Kissinger's memoir.
Exactly.
And it is absolutely fascinating. And Kissinger says, well, there's an unfeeling account of this scene, and that account, and he doesn't name that it's ours, but it is ours, as he says in a footnote, is unfeeling, and it says that Nixon was out of control. And then Kissinger goes on to say Nixon wasn't out of control, he was shattered. And then describes...
And then he described a couple of actions that went a little farther than we did, I think, about pounding...
Well, and not so much that, it was the sheer emotion and the tears and the sense of giving up everything Nixon had fought all of his life for.
This scene, young FBI agents trying to investigate Watergate, reporting to higher-ups, the FBI headed by Patrick Ray and Harry Peterson, who were sharing information with the White House. Contrast the two young Metro reporters, Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, reporting to editors. Who had more opportunity, more flexibility? Who could be more aggressive? Young FBI agent, young reporter?
Well, we could. And the other thing is that our institution had the ability to follow through with the information, whereas the judicial system did not, because Peterson, the person that you mentioned, was at the top of the Justice Department, just under the Attorney General. And Nixon, one of the things you see in the tapes is that Nixon manipulated Peterson brilliantly, was on the phone with him constantly.
Had meetings with him.
Had meetings with him. Peterson was an honest man, but he got, it was as if he had blinders on that were put there by Richard Nixon. And those under him had the same blinders.
By Nixon, I would say by the presidency. Peterson held the presidency in awe and actually talked about grand jury information to President Nixon when, in a way, Nixon was the subject of that investigation.
The overwhelming power of the presidency, government employees holding it in awe. Do reporters hold the presidency in awe?
Well, no. I mean, your question about would you rather be a young FBI agent working on this case or a couple of young reporters in Washington? And what happens in the FBI, if you want to talk to somebody, you want to interview somebody, it has to be cleared all the way up the line. As Carl points out, there was a cover-up going on. John Dean was sitting in on interviews. If you worked at the committee for the re-election of the president or the White House and the FBI wanted to interview you, there would be John Dean sitting there taking notes and reporting back.
From the first day, we did something that the government investigators did not, that made all the difference. We interviewed the same people that they did, we now know. We interviewed them in their homes, at night, away from their jobs, away from pressure. The FBI interviewed virtually all of them in their offices with superiors around and often with legal counsel there. Made all the difference. We got very different information in some cases.
Sometimes the same information, but we believed that young secretaries, aides who would look you in the eye and say, I saw Gordon Liddy go to the shredder
exactly
with $100 bills and actually shred $100 bills so the money couldn't be followed.
We have just a minute left. Richard Nixon resigned 25 years ago. What should the American people think, believe, is the lasting legacy of Watergate?
I think, as I said earlier, that the system worked, that we had an aberrational criminal presidency in our history, and that everyone played the role that was, played the hand that was dealt them, that dealt with this criminal presidency and this abuse of authority that was terribly, terribly dangerous to the American system.
I like the ending of Richard Nixon's memoir, in which Nixon quotes his wife, Pat Nixon, as they are leaving Washington, Nixon having just resigned or about to leave the presidency. And Pat Nixon, to no one, says, "It's so sad. It's so sad." That's the record of criminality and the baseness of what went on is very, very clear. But the bottom line is it's sad.
This was a human being who had to give up. I mean, there are true elements of tragedy here. This was a human being who had to give up the office of the presidency and what he had strived for all his life.
And we hope it never is repeated again. Bob Woodward, Carl Bernstein, we thank you for reporting on history, making history, and we thank you very much for sharing it with our viewers tonight on CNBC. And we'll be back next weekend with Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes, right here on CNBC.
If you wish to purchase a copy of this program, please send $8 for a transcript or for a videotape, send $27.95 plus $5 for shipping and handling to Burrelle's, P.O. Box 7, Livingston, New Jersey 07039. For credit card orders, please call 1-800-777-839.